Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to your TD Fitness channel. This is episode number 23, and I am excited about this episode. The title is Want to Try? Things to Consider for the Long Distance Triathlon Newbie. Now, before you tune me out, before you flip the channel, before you go on to something else on your smartphone, I want you to hang with me for a little bit because many of you are probably thinking, all right, I listen to the TD Fitness podcast. I follow TD Fitness, and usually the topics are right down my alley: health, fitness, nutrition. This one seems a little extreme, a little bit out there. I'm not even thinking about doing a long distance triathlon, but I want you to hang with me here because what you'll find is that so many things that apply to the discipline of triathlon or the discipline of training for a long distance race of any sort, or the discipline associated with trying to reach a long-term goal, those things translate to so many other things in your health and fitness journey and in life in general. So that's what I hope you get out of this. Now, what question are we trying to answer in this episode? Why are we even talking about triathlon? Yeah, it's a health and fitness podcast, but like I said, you may be thinking this is a little bit extreme. So we're going to address that. Why is it important? Because there are so many health benefits, and I mean beyond just the exercise component. There are so many benefits to engaging in something like a long distance triathlon or having a long distance endurance goal. So who is this for? If you have a goal that you are looking to shoot for, you're trying to reach new heights. It doesn't have to be a triathlon, like I said. It could be a 5K. It could be walking a mile. I just use this example of triathlon, but many of the concepts here, again, apply to whatever your goal for healthier living is. So, what's the takeaway here? The takeaway is that the impossible is possible with a plan, with consistency, and when you believe. That is the most important thing I want you to get out of this episode here. Of course, there's a freebie associated with this one. The freebie is a Half-Ironman training plan. It's one that I created. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we're going to jump right into the episode, into the episode here. And the roadmap that we're going to use is really a three-part plan. We're going to talk about the motivation behind all of this, and I'll do that through my story. We're going to talk about the benefits associated with something like training for a long distance triathlon, and we're going to talk about the cons or the negatives because, of course, I always want to present the most objective picture that I can. So I want to balance out some of the highs, some of the benefits with some of the negatives to consider because I want to be upfront with you about all that. But at the end of the day, I do want you to know that this is something that I practice, something that I believe in, something that I recommend for many people, and I try to get as many people as I can involved in the sport of triathlon because I believe in it. And you'll understand a little bit of why I believe all this after you hear what I present in this episode. So let's start with the motivation. And I want to talk about my story a little bit just so you have some insight into where I'm coming from and some of the things that drive me, my motivators, if you will. So this is the story behind how I developed my plan. I know that everyone is a little bit different though, so understand that this is unique to me. So I'll start by saying that a lot of what I teach talks about finding your true motivation behind what it is that you're trying to accomplish, what it is that you're trying to achieve, whatever goal, short-term or long-term that you have. There has to be some underlying motivation, something that resonates with you on a value-based level. It can't just be the fact that you want to fit into a nice swimsuit or something like that. Typically, it's got to be something that resonates deeply within you. That's one of the things that we talk about in the FitLife Program. It's one of the very first steps in determining what your goal really means to you. So we call this finding your why. And for me, in 2007, when my father passed, I wanted to do something to commemorate him, not just that year, but year after year, either around the time of his death or around the time of his birthday. I wanted to do something that I hadn't done before, something that would push me, something that would challenge me. And what I came upon was triathlon. Now, if you go back and listen a couple episodes back, I believe it was episode number 18, where I talked about my plight with learning to swim, that will give you an idea of how far away I was from completing a triathlon, let alone a long distance triathlon. But what happened is that desire to accomplish a triathlon every year has morphed into a commemoration of sorts for each of my parents. I lost my mom last year as well, and I will tell you that is often that thought, the memory of them, is often what keeps me going during those long training days and even on race day when things get tough. So finding that true motivation, for me, it's commemorating loved ones, commemorating my parents who I've lost. That is what drives me to do this. That's really one of the main underlying points associated with why I do what I do when it comes to triathlon. Now, I will tell you that I did not really know where to start. I did obviously have a health and fitness background, being trained as a personal trainer, but I never really programmed plans for long distance or endurance events. But every plan that I came upon was A, expensive, and B, it just called for too much time. I mean, here I was in 2000, 2007, 2008 time frame, obviously had a career, full-time job, had a family. We hadn't had kids yet, but we were trying to start a family, and we knew that things were going to get busier with that. Both my wife and I are working full-time, still in the military, and things were just busy. Life was what it was. It's busy for most people in that regard. So I had to try to find something that I could fit into my life. I couldn't find anything, so I decided to develop it myself. And it really turned into somewhat of an experiment for me, because I knew I didn't have the time to devote that the traditional training plans called for. Most of the traditional plans called for at least 7 to 10 hours a week of training for a half-Ironman. And if you were looking to do a full Ironman, a 140.6 mile race, that called for 14 hours a week of training. I don't have time to do that. Most people don't, unless that's what you do for a living. So I decided to work smarter, not harder, and not longer, and really utilize the benefits and some of the science behind interval training when it came to training for endurance events. So I did a lot of research on that and developed a plan that I didn't know if it would work or not, but I roped 3 other friends into doing it with me, and all of us completed not only a half Ironman, but we completed a full Ironman, first attempt at both in 2014. So that was the story behind how I got started in all of this. I'll talk a little bit more about that plan. That plan that I developed for the half Ironman is actually the freebie that we're going to give to you for this episode. Now, I want to talk about some of the benefits, some of the rewards associated with triathlon, for me at least. The first is having a long-term goal is vitally important. I can't live my life one day at a time when it comes to setting and striving for goals. It has to be something farther out on the horizon that I can break down into shorter, more manageable goals, like daily or weekly workouts. But I have to have something, at least for me, something that I look out in the distance towards. It's got to be something that's challenging, but something that is reachable or attainable. And that attainable part is what many people question when it comes to long distance triathlon. When you hear distances like 70.3 miles, that just sounds crazy to so many people. But I'm here to tell you that it is not as difficult as you think when you have a plan, when you're consistent, and when you believe that you can, going back to the takeaway for this episode. So that's the first thing, the benefits of having a long-term goal, because it in that long-term goal, there are so many short-term goals that have several benefits themselves, and I'll talk a little bit about those. So for me, training for a triathlon is really an exercise in putting just about all of the healthy living habits that I strive for and that I teach into practice. So I'll refer to the FitLife program. It's broken up into three components, at least the academic portion is. Behavior change, so the mental aspect of what we need to grasp and tackle when it comes to living healthier, nutrition, and then fitness. So on the behavior change side, we talk about goals being meaningful and value-based. As I said at the beginning, I have that foundation when it comes to the reason behind why I do triathlon, and that is to commemorate loved ones. We talk about performance-based goal setting, not outcome-based goals. Performance goals are goals that basically track your effort towards something, not the outcome that may result from that. For example, weight loss is an outcome-based goal, yet it's something that you can't really control, whether you lose weight or how much you lose. But what you can control are your performance measurements towards that goal, which is going to the gym maybe 3 times a week, incorporating 2 or 3 servings of fruits and vegetables per day. Those are performance-based goals. Those are things you can control. And when it comes to training for a long-distance triathlon, the performance goals for me are hitting those markers of a set number of workouts per week and the distances that I plan to accomplish week after week. So we have the goals being meaningful and value-based. We have performance-based goal setting, SMART goals. We've talked about this in the past as well. So defining those goals so that they are tangible, long-term, but can be broken down into shorter, more manageable steps. And then identifying obstacles and developing solutions. When it comes to training for a long-distance endurance event, there are always things that are competing for your time. They're competing against getting those workouts in. So it forces you to plan and to overcome those things. It's a constant exercise, but it's something that I can take not just in the triathlon training season, but that I can move into the off season in everyday life, because it's something that I have to practice day in and day out as far as fitting healthy habits into my lifestyle, whether I'm training for a triathlon or not. That's just something that needs to be done. And then the last thing on the behavior change side is consistency. So staying consistent. I look at each one of the workouts when it comes to training for an Ironman or training for a long distance triathlon race. Each workout is a deposit, if you will, a deposit into your bank of training, and you're going to cash in on all of that effort, all of those deposits on race day. So what you put into it is exactly what you're going to get out of it. And I tell people, you just don't want to be overdrawn on race day, all right? On the nutrition side, there are a couple of different components that we think about here. The first is having to really think about the food you eat as fuel during your training period. I don't change a whole lot, quite frankly, from one part of the year to the next, whether it's the off season or the training season. But I do have to pre-fuel for those long training rides and those long runs. I have to be deliberate about that. I have to think about those things. And then nutrition on race day. Man, that has got to be dialed in, especially when you think about the elements, whether it's very hot outside, you may be more apt to get dehydrated. There's so many things to consider, and you're forced to know what your body needs, when it needs it, and it makes you better educated and better prepared to eat to feed your body, not just your appetite. Again, even when you're not training. So those lessons that I learn on the nutrition side of the house about how my body reacts in certain times, what my body needs at certain times, those things, again, I can use in the off season as well. And then on the fitness side, you know, last week we talked about the components of my off-season workout plan. Well, guess what? My training season plan has the exact same components. They're just different amounts of each. And here's why each is important. You remember me talking about, number one, stretching being the most important thing. If I can't do anything else from week to week, at least I want to get in some good flexibility and mobility work through the form of stretching or active movement. If you're flexible and balanced from one side to the next, or if you're imbalanced, I should say, from one side to the next, or you're tight in the back on the posterior chain muscles like your calves, your hamstrings, your lower back, those types of imbalances will make themselves known over the course of a long distance race. If you think about just a marathon, not even a triathlon, but just a marathon, or let's just say a half marathon, 13.1 miles, an average person takes 2,000 steps per mile. That's 26,000 steps. So any minor imbalance is going to be exaggerated over a long race and over months of training. So stretching and proper balance between when it comes to your muscular and your skeletal movements, those things have got to be improved upon if you want to complete the race, and if you want to do it without injury, and if you want to compete at a certain level. Okay, so stretching, mobility, flexibility, that is a must. Next, cardiovascular capacity. Now, that kind of goes without saying, right? Because it's an endurance race after all. Let me tell you a story about a medical checkup that I had, just an annual physical that I had. I went to the doctor, and I was in the middle of training, my training season, and because I turned 40 that year, I think, so I had to get an EKG. And the EKG showed, basically, it appeared as though my heart was underproducing significantly. But the doctor knew, you know, I talked to the doctor already. He looked at it and he explained to me what's really going on here is the fact that your heart is about twice as big as a normal person's heart. You have to remember the heart is a muscle, and the more you work that muscle, your heart, the bigger it gets. It's going to grow, so it has a greater capacity. Secondly, because I was doing all of that training, my cardiovascular system had become very efficient. So here I am with a heart muscle that's almost twice as big as a normal heart muscle, and it's working half as hard. So it looked like my heart was putting out about a quarter of the blood that it needed to be, but I was actually just in really good shape because I was in the middle of training season. So cardiovascular capacity is going to improve tremendously when you train for an endurance race if you do it the right way. Next, interval training. We talked about that as being a component of my exercise plan last week as well. And I also talked about at the beginning of this episode how I wanted to put that science into practice, right? So to see if interval training could replace miles on end of running or miles after miles of riding or a bunch of hours on the bike or in the saddle. And it turned out that interval training absolutely can do that, again, when done the right way, when programmed correctly and actually accomplished, when the workouts are actually accomplished. So the training plan that I'll get into here in a little bit later averages 5 hours of exercise per week. A lot less in the beginning of the season and a little bit more at the end of the season, towards 7 hours towards the end of the training season. But it averages over the course of 6 months, it averages 5 hours a week. For a lot of people, that is what they do anyway for exercise. You think 5 workouts a week, about an hour a piece, there you go. You could train for a Half-Ironman. Next, core training. When it comes to swimming and running, really, both of those disciplines rely very heavily on a strong core. So core training is an important part of my training plan during the training season and during the off season. And I still only practice one workout a week when it comes to the core. So I'll incorporate one core session and one strength session, often combine those two into one workout session during the triathlon training season. And then, as I mentioned, strength training. Strength training is often neglected by triathletes. You see so many triathletes that are extremely thin, don't do a lot of muscular exercise or strength training, but I've also seen some very muscular folks just straight up crush it in the race. So strength training is important because it serves to protect your body to an extent. It makes you stronger. You will do better if you're balanced in the sense of strong cardiovascular capacity and strong muscular capacity when it comes to muscular endurance and muscular strength. So strength training is important when it comes to endurance races. Now, a little bit about the strategies for each discipline. These are some of the other benefits, and really I categorize these as life lessons, if you will. So when it comes to swimming, swimming is all technique. Again, go back to episode number 18, listen to that, and I talk about how technique and repetition are so important when it comes to learning the discipline of swimming. But it also forces you to stay calm, stay calm in the water. I'll never forget my very first race. It was a very short one, sprint triathlon. My mom was there watching me. We all came out to kind of commemorate Dad, and my wife was there shooting a video. But there were so many people in that very short race. I mean, I think the distance for the swim was about 400 meters. It was in open water in the river, but there were so many people that just had anxiety because of the open water. And my mother was extremely nervous for me, but I was able to, complete the swim and come out unscathed, if you will. But swimming in open water forces you to face a lot of fears, really, and remain calm in a situation where you may not feel completely comfortable. They say you're not going to win the race in the swim, no matter what distance triathlon you're talking about, because it's such a small fraction of your total race time. But although you may not win the race in the swim, you could absolutely lose it in the swim. That's as the saying goes. So swimming, for me, it teaches you technique, which amplifies the importance of having a process down. You can't just brute force your way and use strength in the swim. It's got to be technique. You got to hit those marks. You got to stay calm. So that, in my mind, is a life lesson in itself, and it's something that I've been able to apply not just in my training, but in life in general. Next, the bike. The bike is all about endurance. It's all about the long game. It's about consistency over time. It's about having the right nutrition, the right hydration. It's all about planning, because the bike is typically the longest part of the race when you talk about long distance triathlon. But for me, the bike really teaches patience. It gives me a time to reflect, and it gives me practice in focusing, not just when your body is tired, but when your mind is tired. When you've been on the bike for hours on end, you'd be surprised how tired your mind gets, even though it doesn't seem like you're doing a lot. But it does take a lot to pay attention to where you're going, to look out for other riders, to look out for other cars, to look out for things on the trail or in the road. One quote that I read recently said that patience is not simply the ability to wait, but it's how we behave while we're waiting. So being on the bike for that amount of time and having to deal with all of the things that come at you, all as small as they may seem, but over time it really adds up. Being able to deal with that is, again, a skill that you can take not just from the bike to other fitness areas of your life, but something that can be more broadly applied in your life in general. I am so glad that I got into triathlon before having children, because I really believe that the patience that I had to learn over the course of some very long rides, maybe 10 hours at a time at times, is something that absolutely helps me when it comes to dealing with a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. Okay? Now, on to the run. The running for me is, if I could do a triathlon without running, then I would do it. But it wouldn't really be a triathlon, right? The running is my least favorite event. Let me put it that way. For me, it's just gutting through it. It's being uncomfortable, but learning to press through to the end. That is the hardest part of the race for me, no matter what distance we're talking about. But like I said, kind of the life lesson is that running forces me to fight through it. It forces me to fight through that pain, to fight through the discomfort, and to deal with that state of discomfort. In a lot of ways, it makes me face my fears of possibly not finishing, because I know that this is the last step that I need to get through in order to cross that finish line. So those are some of the discipline by discipline strategies or life lessons that I think about when it comes to triathlon. Again, just based on my personal experience, it may be different for you. Maybe you're a runner. Maybe you don't like biking. I don't know, but I think that there is value in each one of the disciplines and things that you can take away that ultimately make you a better person, better individual, maybe a better husband, father, wife, you name it. Now, some of the cons, some of the negatives that I promised that I was going to give you the objective view, the objective scoop. So all of that said, the benefits that I talked about, the life lessons, it's definitely not all flowers and glitter, I'll say, okay? There's some sacrifice. When you decide to commit to a long distance endurance event, there is sacrifice. There are many sacrifices that you have to make. Number one, it's not cheap, okay? Triathlon typically costs money. The races, particularly for the Ironman events, can be expensive, several $100. And it requires equipment. It's not like you just picked up jogging. Now you have to add a bike and some swim gear and so forth. So jogging is pretty cheap, but triathlon is not as cheap when you talk about purchasing a bike and all of the equipment that goes along with it. So that's the first thing. Understand that there's a monetary investment that comes along with this. Next, it requires time and effort. So I mentioned that the training plan for the Half-Ironman averages only 5 hours a week over the course of 6 months. But even 5 hours a week is quite a time burden if you're not used to doing that, and if you have priorities in other areas of your life. But I will tell you that most of the things worth pursuing do require time and effort, and I feel like this is one of those things. Obviously, there's more training towards the end of the program as your distances and your performance increases towards you as you get closer to the race. But again, that time and effort is not something that is to be taken lightly. It is indeed a commitment. And then finally, there is a level of personal risk, personal injury, and pain in training. If you are not smart about, if you don't go about your trainings smartly, then you could do too much too fast, and you could risk injury. The swim, talking about race day, and whether you're swimming during training or on race day, swimming can be dangerous. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat that. Biking, you could get hurt really bad if you're not careful. A very good friend of mine had a pretty bad bike accident. He's okay now, but there are things that come at you either on the road or on the trail or even during race day. Other riders, if you're not careful and cautious, you could get hurt. Now, knock on wood, I have not had any incidents swimming. I've only had minor incidents on the bike, but again, I point these things out because they are things to consider, particularly if you're gonna get into this as a newbie. And then finally, the run, as I already said, the run it's just not fun for me. All right, so that's when you talk about levels of personal risk, injury, or pain, the run for me is always a personal risk and is always painful. So now, on the other side though, there is a huge sense of accomplishment. About 1 in 700 people have finished in a half Ironman distance race. That's 70.3 miles. The numbers are actually probably even smaller than that, but I'm being I'm being somewhat generous with that number. So 1 in 700, that's a fraction of a percent. All right. Another benefit though, you get the t-shirt, right? I wear mine with pride. You can see it right here. I wear it so much that my friends are tired of seeing them. I have so many triathlon t-shirts because you get one for every race that you do, or at least one. And then I also buy some because I'm proud of what I've done. I am proud that I have been able to complete triathlons. I'm proud that I've completed a half Ironman and a full Ironman race. That is something that I will always be proud of. And then you get the plaque on the wall, right? You can see it, the plaque on the wall behind me. But one of the most important things that I think is a benefit when it comes to engaging in the sport of triathlon is the community. Many people have this impression, many people who aren't triathletes have an impression of triathletes as being unsociable, the folks that hardly ever go out to dinner with friends, and if they do, they don't want to eat anything on the menu because they're so strict. I will tell you that is a very small percentage of the community. Every race that I go to, particularly the longer events, there are always new people coming to engage in those races or to complete those races, and the community just embraces them and tries to help out however they can. And I like that. I like that community feel. I like the fact that most people view the community as a family and they're there to help one another. They understand that this is, maybe a bucket list goal or a goal for someone who's already lost a lot of weight and they wanted to complete a half Ironman or an Ironman race. I mean, there are so many inspiring stories like that. Every year they televise the Ironman championships down in Kona in Hawaii, and they have on the TV episode of the TV series or the TV special, I should say, there are so many inspiring stories, and it's just great to watch that year after year. So the community is maybe the biggest benefit of engaging in long distance triathlons. Now, let me talk a little bit about the freebie that I'm providing for this episode, and that is the Half Ironman training plan. So as far as the plan components, they're really, I want you to look at it this way. There are two types of preparation for endurance events of long distance, right? There are plans that prepare you to compete, and there are plans that prepare you to complete the race, okay? You have the competition plans, i.e. you want to do very well, and the completion plans, you just want to finish the race. When it comes to long distance triathlon, the plan that I developed, I'm telling you right now, is one to complete the race. It is not going to get you to first place, all right? I don't want you to try to kill yourself with every workout. The goal here for me is health and fitness. It's not to bring home a medal, although everybody gets a medal, but it's not to get first, second, or third place. So I don't want you killing yourself with every workout. The high intensity workouts are meant to provide to cut back on the repetitive endurance training in a way that you can, accomplish those workouts in a shorter period of time. And instead of looking at your workouts as like 100% effort for each session, consider the individual workouts as a small percentage of a total 100% effort over the course of your 6-month training period, if you will. So it is a 6-month plan. Like I said earlier, it averages 5 hours a week and leverages interval training to build cardiovascular capacity, basically saving wear and tear on the knees and your other joints. There are 6 programmed workouts per week, but some can and should be combined. So that doesn't necessarily mean you have to work out 6 days every week. It also incorporates rest and recovery weeks. Just like last week when I talked about my off-season plan, I intentionally add a down week after every 4th week of training. So the purpose of those recovery weeks, though, isn't necessarily to take a full 6 or 7 days off. The recovery days add rest into the 6 workouts per week routine. So it's fine if you use the recovery week and the preceding or following training week as kind of a 2-week period for accomplishing a week's worth of workouts. The point, though, is to deliberately add some rest days into the routine. I've seen and experienced overtraining. It is no fun. It can come on suddenly and it can easily force you to take time off. So those programmed recovery weeks help you kind of stay ahead of that curve. The training plan gradually progresses you and steps you up in the distances for each discipline when it comes to swimming, biking, and running. And obviously, it includes the flexibility and mobility work and core and strength training, as I mentioned before. So take a look at that Half-Ironman training plan. Consider maybe starting with a smaller or shorter type of race, a shorter event like a sprint triathlon. Those typically you can complete the entire race in about an hour, hour and a half. Then the Olympic distance is kind of the next distance. That's the distance between the shorter sprint races and the half-Ironman distances, 70.3 miles. And then you have the half-Iron and then the full Ironman at 140.6 miles. So that is about all I have for you in this episode, but you get a bonus 3 quotes from me in this episode because I think all 3 are appropriate and I really like each one of them. So the first is a quote by Albert Einstein. It says, "Only those who attempt the absurd can achieve the impossible." All right? You may think that it is absurd to think about doing a long distance triathlon, a long distance race like a marathon or half marathon, even a 5K. You may think that it's absurd. If you're sedentary right now and you have pain and trouble walking, you may think that it's absurd that you could even walk a mile. But I'm here to tell you that if you attempt the, quote, absurd, then you absolutely can achieve the impossible, as Albert Einstein says. The second quote, "Today I will do what others won't, so tomorrow I can accomplish what others can't." I love this quote. This is one that I came across. Actually, a buddy of mine showed me this quote. He had it in his email signature, and it is something that I remember particularly on those days when I wake up very early in the morning to knock out a training session so that I can do that and get back before the kids wake up so that I don't have to sacrifice time with the family. I'm very cognizant of spending too much time doing other things. I want to make sure that I'm here for the family and watching the kids grow and spending time with my lovely wife. So today I will do what others won't, so tomorrow I can accomplish what others can't. When it's tough to get up in the mornings and do those workouts, or when it's tough to make it to the gym or tough to take the bike out in maybe some cold weather or tough to head out and go for a run in some hot weather, this is the quote that I remember. Today I will do what others won't, so tomorrow I can accomplish what others can. Jerry Rice said that quote. He was a wide receiver for the San Francisco 49ers for a number of years, so that's a good one. And then finally, probably my favorite, if you're watching the video, you can see it on my shirt. It's Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And I really firmly believe that. It's something that I try to live by. And again, when you go back to the absurdity of thinking about completing a long distance race, this is something that I want you to consider, that we are so much more capable of what we think we can do. And it comes down to having faith, having a plan, staying consistent with that plan, and really believing in yourself. So I will leave you with that. I want to remind you that there is a freebie for you to download. That's the Half-Ironman training plan. You can grab that at tdfitness.net/023 download. Also, check out the show notes for this episode at tdfitness.net/023. There you will find links to listen or watch or consume this content pretty much however you want. You can also grab the freebie there. You can download a transcript, and you'll find links to all of the references that I made in this episode. Again, folks, thank you so much for tuning in. I want you to have a blessed one. Coach T, out.